Hi everyone, this is Carl Dawn Stover. I'm doing my Module 3, in which I actually went around and interviewed a variety of different people and found out a little bit about SPED and what they thought about it. So, with my special education interviews, I interviewed 3 different people. One was our SPED teacher, Mrs. Vague. She actually just moved into general ed this year and moved out of SPED. As she took up another program for students in need that didn't qualify for SPED, and we really wanted to get that program going. And she was an awesome teacher and really was excited about it. I also interviewed Angie Potacek. She is one of our paras at the school. She has worked in a variety of my different classrooms in the ag department. And then I also interviewed one of my administrators, Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis is our vice principal and also our athletic director. So let's just jump into the questions. How do you identify SPED students? Asking these 3 different ones, they each kind of had a different outlook on how they took the question. Mrs. Vague, our SPED teacher, really said that she liked to be actively looking for kids at all times and kind of watching kids to see where they were struggling with in classes while she was in the classroom or while one of her paras was in the classroom. She wanted to have a good idea of what the kids were actually doing. Next, anytime a new student come into school, she actually really liked for the counselor to request records on that student, and if they were a special education student, she wanted to know. She said probably the most sensitive cases were students who were foster students or students have been pulled out of their homes before, as possibly they could have slipped through the cracks in terms of like getting all their complete records if they've jumped homes and jumped from school to school. Before she actually wanted to bring kids into the special education program, she always wanted to do a first response intervention and see whether that kid could just have some minor changes in their education and see if that would help versus putting into a full special education. If the parents actually wanted them to go ahead and do the test, she actually preferred the Woodcock-Johnson test over any other to kind of see where they were in their academics. The para, Angie, she said she liked to observe behaviors in class and kind of report that back to the special education director. And she also liked to experiment with different ways in learning with those kids before they were tried to get them into the special education program. Administration. Mr. Davis took a very process-based form. He said that the parents must make the request to test the child. He could not do that. The special education teacher could not do that. Only the parent could. Then that parent would need to notify the administrator, counselor, or the teacher and to start the process. Then they would follow through with the paperwork and then request the appropriate testing. Each one kind of a different outlook on it, but each one, very viable on what they had to do. So what is so challenging about special education? Mrs. Vague, she talked about this one a lot as the special education teacher. One of the things that she said was so frustrating was that she had to justify every move she made. And she had to document. There was always a record she was supposed to be doing. There was always permission. There was always paperwork. And it seemed like that was all she was doing. Sometimes that felt like she was swamped by that and unable to help some students because she had to get all the paperwork done. Some other things that she thought was challenging was what kids qualify. Not all kids qualify for special education services, but some kids, do need extra help. They just don't qualify for special education. And she really worried about those kids who fell through the cracks and were kind of missed by education. And that's one of the reasons she actually took over our new program at our school to work with those high-risk kids that don't, qualify for those services. Para, Ms. Potacek, said probably the biggest trouble with her was teacher understanding about what her job was and how to work with a kid and how to modify. That sometimes teachers think that she's just doing the work for the kid, which really she might just be scribing or reading into it because they require that. She said probably her most challenging students were her ADHD students because their brain just doesn't work like, normal. Like teachers would have a hard time understanding them because they're just always, they have to be doing something. They can't concentrate for nearly as long. And she says that was frustrating for her. Our administrator, Mr. Davis, said the paperwork was the most challenging because there was so much of it and it seemed like it was always weighing him down, or weighing his special education teachers down. What's the most rewarding part with special education? My sped teacher, she's so funny. She was like, I love my kids. They are my kids. I treat them like my kids. I just love them all. She really values building trust, building relationships. I'll be honest, she's one of my prize mentors at my school. I go to her for help on a lot of different things. She's just very invested in the school. I wish we could have all the teachers just like her with how much passion she has for what she does. Another thing she said was the light bulb moment. She explained that as, the moment she had been working with a student, then all of a sudden it's like somebody came and flipped the light switch on and they're like, I get it. I totally get it. Those are really fun because I see those happen in my classroom too. And it's always just like, yes, we accomplished something today. Mrs. Potacek said her most rewarding thing was that the kids feel success. Some of the kids that she works with, when they get into special education, have got to the point where they just hate coming to school, maybe because they don't feel smart, they don't have the best grades, maybe they have problems with just attitude or discipline, and they don't understand the structure of school. So she loves it when she can help improve the excitement of those students so that they come to school and they're excited to see her, they're excited to see their teachers, they're excited to learn, which is awesome. I know that would be such a great rewarding career, and that's why she likes it. Our administrator, Mr. Davis, he said he just likes seeing the success of the students, especially when our services work. For those students, you can definitely see the value of the program. What advice do you have for supervising special education staff? Mrs. Vague said, number one, she likes when things are outlined clearly. She wants to know the expectations. She wants to know who has the authority, who is over her, and who's kind of making the roll calls. And then she also said, make sure you listen to the para support. She said, to me, she's like, all those paras who work with those kids, they know the kids better than any teacher because they're working with them hands-on every day. They know about what their life is going on, if there's problems, because they're talking with them on a one-on-one basis. Mrs. Potacek, our para, said she would really like, if just the supervising wise, if proper education for all of those involved, that including like the general education staff, so just teaching them about certain diagnosis and how to work with those students. Then also proper communication of when you're going to be supervising, also so they can let you know what those students are like, what their diagnosis is, and what certain modifications that those students require. The administrator, Mr. Davis, said this was a tough question for him because actually at our school, our special education department is actually worked out with an out-of-district cooperative. We're with USC 305, so he doesn't actually have supervising rights over special education. However, he still works with all those teachers. They're still part of our staff. They come to all of our staff meetings. So he kind of just treats it like he's the eyes and ears, kind of looking out for them, dealing with any disciplinary issues, and he likes to give good feedback to them. So that they know if something is going on in the school or something that they should be aware of. Working with parents, that's always fun, whether you're special education or a regular ed. Special education teacher Mrs. Vague said the biggest thing for her was communication. And she said every single parent communicates differently. Some parents want texts. Some parents want phone calls. Some parents want emails. Some parents want you to come and talk to them at their place of work or at their home. She said, you just have to work with each parent. You have to be willing to work with each parent. Another thing she said when she was communicating is she always makes sure that she told parents positives about their child and, of course, the negatives. She said some of the parents that she works with, they hear negatives all the time and not very many positives. Next up is just building relationships. She's like, that was really important to her. so that they knew that they could count on her to help their child. Mrs. Potacek, the para, said open communication was the best policy. Be honest, really let them know what's going on in school and what's going on in their classes. Showing parents a lot of respect, and not being defensive about anything. A lot of times parents might just not understand, so you just have to calmly explain different items and why you're doing something. Mr. Davis, he said, just be honest. Parents, if they know you're being honest, they know that you have their kids' best interest in hand, they will buy into the program, they will buy into that education. So there has to be buy-in, not only from him, the administrator, the special education department, but also the parent. How do you work with regular ed teachers? First of all, you have to know your teacher's expectations, Mrs. Biggs said. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's a great point. You should know the teacher's expectations. You also have to know the child's abilities as well. She said that she has become a great compromiser because of how each and every teacher works their classroom differently. You have to know what the teacher will do and will not do for that student, as each one is different. Mrs. Potacek said, talk with them. Have conversations, be open, be willing to start the conversation, be willing to go in before school or after school to, if you're having problems or that student's having problems, to figure it out. And really explain the modifications to teachers, as not all the time general ed teachers know how to change things or what's a correct way. Next, she likes to ask questions about the classroom environment to try to help the teacher and then give suggestions. Mr. Davis said good communication is key. Also, he was like, the regular education teachers have to take the effort and adapt. He said special education can't do their job if regular ed teachers are not willing to assist, or not willing to change and work with them to try to do the best thing for the student. Some advice for a first-year administrator. This was kind of fun because all three of these kind of knew I was taking classes. And they were like, oh, they're kind of excited that I was getting onto this one, especially the special education department, because they're like, you're going to learn a lot. So Mrs. Vague, she said, if you don't know, you need to ask a question. Don't be afraid. It's not a dumb question. She also said that you need to know who to ask. Certain questions maybe should be directed towards her, to a para, to the other special education teacher at the school. Next up, she said, ask more than one person. Ask a few, and then make sure you ask the student if there's a student involved, because they can give you an answer too. And then be willing to make a decision on whatever you're coming into contact with. Document that decision and document everything you have to do with a special education student. The para, she said, you can learn from all staff. Make sure you have open communication lines. Make sure your door is always open so that people can come in and talk to you. And then make sure you treat everybody the same. Don't act like a para isn't just as good as a person as the special education teacher or a general ed teacher. Treat us all the same. The administrator, he said, let the special education department teach you. It's like they know tons. You go in and talk to them, they're willing to work with you, to teach you, to tell you about the rules and regulations, to tell you about the kids. You just have to be willing to walk through the door. He also said make sure you learn the process. He said that's sometimes the most difficult thing. The relationship between SPED and men. Mrs. Vague said you need to have a good working relationship. You need to be on the same side and back your teacher. If you hire a great special education teacher, they'll do their job, they'll work with the kids, and they'll try to work for success, but have their back. Mrs. Potacek said this is very important. Really, that relationship is key to making the system work. I mean, her end goal is always to, see her kids graduate and be off in the real world. The administrator said equality. Make sure you're learning from your special education department, and make sure you're asking them for a lot of help with all that paperwork that you're going to have to fill out. All of the three actually had very similar things to say about characteristics. They wanted them to be open-minded and respectful, willing to learn, and it's okay to learn from your mistakes. Thanks, and have a great night.